Let's say you agree to fight someone at 170 pounds, but your opponent actually ends up weighing 175 pounds. You'd say that was an unfair advantage, right? What if I told you that a fighter who misses weight is actually more likely to lose, despite the advantage of not making weight? The data tells us that fighters who missed weight in the UFC actually go on to lose 57% of the time. This is one of 4 weird patterns I found when analysing years of UFC data, all of which I'll break down in this video. Before I get onto the remaining 3, let's try and explain our first finding. Wouldn't missing weight be an advantage? Well, yes, but what we have here is something called selection bias. Missing weight is likely a reflection of one of 3 things: unprofessionalism, illness or injury, or poor weight cutting strategy, all of which are likely to correlate negatively with a fighter's performance. Fighters who miss weight are more likely to exhibit these negative traits, which means their estimated win rate is below the UFC average to begin with. So even if they get a marginal boost in the odds of success by not cutting as much weight, it's likely offset by one of these traits. Here's another one for you. If I told you 112 heavyweight fights in the UFC have ended in submission, how many of these fights do you think were won by the heavier man? As you know, heavyweight has the largest range in weight. Theoretically, a fighter could have a 60-pound advantage on their opponent and the fight would still be sanctioned. I always assumed that a weight advantage went a long way in fighting, especially grappling heavy fights. So I'd guess that of the 112 UFC heavyweight fights that ended in submission, at least say 60% of them would have been won by the heavier fighter, right? Wrong again. Weirdly, only 43% of the winning fighters had a weight advantage. One explanation for this involves the law of diminishing returns. What's often discussed is the existence of an optimal weight, above which a fighter's loss in attributes like speed and agility outweighs their marginal gain in strength and size. As such, a 265-pound fighter could be above this theoretical optimal, and thus be at a disadvantage when fighting a 250-pound fighter who's closer to optimal, thereby explaining why lighter guys prevail more often. I do think this hypothesis is truer for fights that take place on the feet, however. Another explanation could be the influence of outliers. Some grappling specialists have a slightly smaller frame than other heavyweights and can skew the data in favour of the smaller fighter winning. Frank Mir, Alexei Olenek, Sergey Spivak, and Jelton Almeida, for example, often submit larger opponents. Collectively, they account for 19% of all submissions in UFC history, thus have the ability to skew our data in favour of the lighter guys and impact our finding. Let me know if you've got any other theories, put them in the comments. Let's look at another thing I found surprising. If we equalise fight duration, do you think when a heavyweight wins a fight, they'd have more or less control time over their opponent than when a flyweight wins a fight? Yes, would be my answer. I think a flyweight's scrambling a lot better than heavyweights, and thus average control time would be a lot higher in the heavyweight division. But I'd be wrong. 18 seconds for every minute fought in the flyweight division was controlled by the winner, compared to 17 seconds at heavyweight. That surprised me. So I dug a bit deeper, and it turns out I was actually right in my original hypothesis. Flyweights are better scramblers. Here we can see flyweights are much more likely to hit reversals than heavyweights. And here we can see flyweights get back to their feet an average of 21 seconds quicker than heavyweights. So why do flyweights have a higher average control time? The answer is in wrestling activity. Here we see flyweights are a lot more active with their takedowns. Flyweights attempt and land more takedowns per minute than heavyweights, which happens to be the main driver behind their greater average control time. Here's one more for you. Do you think a submission is more or less likely the longer a fight goes? I always assumed fatigue had a large impact on submission likelihood. I think of guys like Islam and Khabib melting their opponents with pressure and then getting submissions later on in the fight. But actually, the data tells us that submissions become less likely the longer a fight goes. This chart shows us the likelihood of submission for each round, conditional on the fight actually reaching that round. All fights have a first round, so the first data point shows us the submission rate for all fights, which is 20%. We then see this drop to 13% if a fight goes past the first round, and down to 6% if a fight gets to the third round. Interestingly, we do see a slight uptick in submission likelihood to 7% if a fight goes to the fourth round. This could potentially be that melting effect we talked about. But then it drops to just 3% if a fight reaches the fifth and final round. So in general, the longer a fight goes, the less likely a submission. I think the implication here is that latching onto a submission early when you have the greatest capacity to squeeze and a dry opponent could be a better strategy than exerting energy trying to wear them out or jumping a ghillie in the later rounds. So that's it, the 5 things I found interesting when analysing the data. If you liked it, hit subscribe. If you're a nerd like me and you want to know about the data and analysis behind this video, I've got a Substack, which I've linked in the video description.